They say a priest's sins are never his own but the congregation's, which was a funny lie because Reverend Dominic had never looked more self-righteous than the morning he accused Mrs. Langley of cruelty. The irony was delicious in a bitter way. The church pews murmured approval, the chandeliers reflected golden disapproval, and Dominic's smile was as sharp as the edge of a guillotine. Then came Marcus. He didn't stand at the altar with trembling hands. He didn't whisper apologies or excuses. He stepped forward, a letter pressed firmly against his chest, eyes bright with unshakable resolve. The congregation's murmur froze into a stunned silence. Dominic's jaw twitched, the smile flickering as though someone had flicked a switch, and for the first time in years, the man who commanded sermons trembled not with fear, but with recognition. Recognition of truth. Marcus had grown up in the shadow of the cathedral spires, raised by a mother who loved him fiercely but feared the church's judgment more. At 15, he had learned the meaning of silence, the weight of secrets carried like stones. He had learned to hide the pulse of his heart from neighbors who whispered about skin color, about differences, about things they could not understand. Love had taught him courage, and courage had taught him to speak. Today, courage led him to the front of the largest, most judgmental audience of his life. Reverend Dominic had been untouchable, an emblem of moral authority that no parishioner dared question. His sermons about kindness, justice, and the sins of others were legendary, laced with eloquence that could melt hearts and sway votes. Yet Dominic's own secrets were dark roots buried under polished floors, hidden behind stained glass smiles, and nurtured in the quiet shadows of the confessional. Marcus knew them all, the letters, the whispered names, the stolen afternoons of passion hidden behind sermons and prayers. He had seen the man falter once when no one watched, the hands trembling over the altar, a note hidden beneath the Bible. Reverend Dominic, Marcus's voice cut through the heavy silence like a bell striking midnight. You have accused others of cruelty while hiding your own truths. His hand held the letter higher, and the paper trembled with his grip. The priest's eyes darted to it, then away, like a child caught in a lie. The congregation leaned forward, sensing the approaching storm, a collision of faith and truth that would leave no one untouched. The tension was palpable. Mrs. Langley, the supposed victim of cruelty, sat rigidly, hands gripping the pew as though the wood could anchor her to reality. Her eyes darted between Marcus and Dominic, shock and cautious hope mingling in the corners of her expression. Dominic's voice, usually smooth and commanding, cracked. What is this? Who gave you this? He demanded, but the question carried no authority anymore. His empire of judgment had found its reckoning, embodied in the calm defiance of a young black man who refused to bow. Marcus's story unfolded with steady clarity, recounting moments of concealed love, small acts of kindness overshadowed by hypocrisy, and the relentless pressure of a society that valued appearances over truth. He spoke of the isolation of being different, the sting of prejudice, and the quiet acts of bravery that often went unnoticed. Each word landed like a stone, and the congregation felt it in their bones. No sermon, no reprimand, no scripture could undo the weight of lived experience laid bare in honesty. Dominic's face grew pale, the color leaching from his cheeks as memories collided with accusations. He opened his mouth, attempted a rebuttal, but Marcus's unwavering gaze held him in place. Years of hidden shame, of secret letters, of stolen evenings, came crashing into the cathedral light like a tidal wave. He realized that authority was meaningless without integrity, that preaching righteousness while hiding sin was a hollow echo. The truth was not a sin he could hide behind. It was a mirror, reflecting his hypocrisy for all to see. The church was a pressure cooker of emotion, the air thick with gasps, murmurs, and the faint scent of incense that could no longer mask tension. Parishioners who had adored Dominic looked from him to Marcus with confusion, fear, and something akin to admiration. Others, hardened by suspicion, felt vindication. The moment hung suspended, each second stretching into eternity, until Dominic's hands shook and he finally reached for the letter, as if touching it could undo the revelations. Marcus's courage was born not just of personal need but of the community that had nurtured him in quiet ways, the friends and family who had whispered encouragement in moments of doubt. He had learned that justice was not only institutional, it was also intimate, rooted in the bravery to speak when silence was easier. He did not falter. His voice remained steady, resonant with the confidence of one who knew that fear could not bind the human spirit forever. The confrontation sparked whispers of larger truths. Other parishioners, emboldened, began to question long-standing hypocrisies, sharing experiences long buried beneath the weight of pious appearances. One by one, hidden stories surfaced, revealing a tapestry of lives constrained by judgment and prejudice. Marcus had not only exposed Dominic, he had ignited a movement of awareness, a subtle but undeniable push against the walls of tradition that often suffocated authenticity. Dominic's own reaction oscillated between anger, shame, and a flicker of relief. He was forced to reckon with the duality of human existence, the complexity of desire, and the cruelty inherent in denying one's own nature. He had built his reputation on moral certainty, but the young man before him held the power of truth that no sermon could counter. For the first time, Dominic saw the faces of those he had wronged, and the weight of decades of concealment pressed upon him. Outside the cathedral, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place within its sacred walls. But within, something irreversible had shifted. The young black man, once silenced by fear, now stood as a beacon of courage and resilience. His act of defiance was not born of malice but of hope that truth, once revealed, could foster understanding and, eventually, acceptance. Marcus remembered his mother's words from his childhood. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Today, he embodied those words. He had faced judgment, prejudice, and power, and he had emerged not only intact but radiant with the knowledge that standing for what is right can change lives. The congregation had witnessed the unmasking of a man revered and feared, but also the rise of a young man who refused to bow to societal constraints. The tension between past sins and future hope played across every face in the pews. Marcus's story was not merely about exposure. It was about reconciliation, about acknowledging the human capacity for error and the potential for growth. Some parishioners wept quietly, others nodded in solemn recognition, and Dominic's gaze fell to the floor, grappling with shame and the first fragile flickers of redemption. Dominic's knees ached as he sank into the nearest pew, the letter still in his hand feeling impossibly heavy. The words on it were not accusations but memories, tender fragments of stolen moments he had long convinced himself were invisible. He remembered the first time he had felt it long before the congregation, long before sermons about morality, when he had looked into a man's eyes and felt his heart tremble in ways it never had with women. That trembling had become a secret ritual, a quiet sin he carried like a shadowed cloak, heavy and suffocating, and now it was ripped from his chest, laid bare for the very community he had sworn to guide. Marcus's presence in front of him was a constant reminder of courage, of truth, and of everything Dominic had denied himself for decades. Every time Marcus's gaze met his, there was no fear, no malice, only steady resolve. That calmness enraged and humbled Dominic simultaneously. He had spent years mastering the art of intimidation, of commanding the room with a smile and a sermon. Yet here he was, rendered powerless by the simple act of honesty. Around them, whispers grew louder. Some parishioners clutched their prayer books, uncertain if they should intervene or remain silent witnesses. Others exchanged glances that spoke of hidden sympathies, of thoughts they had been too afraid to voice. Dominic's reputation, once untouchable, began to crumble under the weight of accumulated secrets. The irony was exquisite and merciless. The man who had preached about the sins of others had lived a life so closely entwined with the very transgressions he condemned. Marcus took a careful step closer. "You taught us about kindness, about justice, but what good are those lessons if they only apply to others? You cannot demand morality from the world when you deny it yourself." His voice was soft but firm, echoing in the cathedral's high ceilings. Dominic could barely lift his eyes, yet he could feel the judgment radiating from every corner of the room, amplified by the young man's courage. He remembered the nights he had spent writing letters to someone he could never name aloud, the clandestine meetings, the whispers in empty hallways. All of it was a secret life built upon fear and societal expectation. Yet Marcus knew it all, as if he had lived it too. And in knowing, Marcus was not seeking vengeance. He sought accountability, the liberation that truth could bring. The congregation shifted uncomfortably, the air thick with moral tension. Some felt betrayal, others curiosity, and a few experienced a strange, unarticulated empathy. Dominic's world had always been black and white: sins, punishments, obedience, but now shades of gray surrounded him, a labyrinth of humanity he had long ignored. Marcus's story continued, weaving threads of his own experiences. The isolation of being black in a world that often dismissed him, the subtle acts of racism in school, in society, in the very city they lived in. He spoke of friends who had been silenced, of families who had disowned children for love that did not conform to tradition, and of the courage it took to live authentically in the face of prejudice. His words struck chords with many in the congregation, revealing that judgment and hypocrisy often walk hand in hand with fear and ignorance. Dominic's hands trembled as he finally set the letter down, unable to meet Marcus's unwavering stare. He had spent his life orchestrating appearances, maintaining control, but none of that mattered now. The young man before him embodied the power of truth, a force more compelling than sermons or doctrine. Dominic realized that the only way forward was acknowledgement, not denial, and perhaps, if he was brave enough, redemption. Outside, the world moved obliviously, but inside, the cathedral became a crucible for transformation. Marcus's act of courage was more than exposure. It was a call to conscience. Parishioners who had never questioned Dominic's authority began to speak, sharing their own experiences, small acts of rebellion against injustice, stories of love and identity they had hidden. The cathedral's walls, once suffocating in their grandeur, seemed to breathe with newfound freedom. Dominic's first words were halting, the usual eloquence absent. "Marcus, you have shown me something I have denied for far too long," he admitted, voice quivering. "I have lived in fear of who I am, in fear of judgment, and in doing so, I have failed many, including myself." The confession hung in the air, heavy but honest. Some parishioners wept quietly, touched by the vulnerability of the man they had once revered as unassailable. Marcus nodded, not triumphantly, but with a gentle assurance. Acknowledgement is the first step. Change is the next. You cannot undo the past, but you can choose to act with integrity now. His words were not a lecture but an invitation, a bridge across the chasm of fear and shame that had long separated them. In the following days, the cathedral became a place of dialogue and reflection. Parishioners gathered not only for sermons, but for conversations about love, prejudice, and acceptance. Dominic, though initially hesitant, began to participate, listening more than speaking, learning more than teaching. He discovered the strength in vulnerability, the power of humility, and the relief of truth. Marcus, meanwhile, navigated his own journey with cautious optimism. The act of exposing Dominic had ripple effects. Some neighbors applauded his bravery, others whispered judgments, but the young man remained steadfast. He continued to advocate for truth and equality, connecting with others who had faced similar struggles, building a network of support that transcended race, sexuality, and social expectation. Family dynamics, too, began to shift. Marcus's mother, initially anxious about potential backlash, found solace in her son's resilience. The bonds of family were tested but ultimately strengthened, grounded in love and mutual respect. She marveled at his courage, realizing that sometimes the hardest battles were not against the world but against the shadows within oneself. Dominic faced personal reckonings of a different kind. The letters and memories he had long suppressed became tools for growth rather than sources of shame. He sought counsel from colleagues, some skeptical, some supportive, learning that reconciliation with oneself is often more difficult than seeking forgiveness from others. He began to challenge not only his own prejudices but also those embedded within the institution he served. Tensions flared occasionally, as old habits die hard and change is never linear. Some parishioners resisted, clinging to tradition and familiar moral frameworks. Others struggled with reconciling faith with the recognition of human complexity. Yet through dialogue, persistence, and openness, small victories accumulated. Awareness spread gradually, like sunlight through stained glass, illuminating corners long shrouded in darkness. Marcus's influence extended beyond the cathedral. He spoke at community gatherings, schools, and forums, advocating for intersectional understanding how race, sexuality, and family expectations intersect to shape human experience. His story inspired many, particularly young people navigating similar challenges. He emphasized courage, authenticity, and compassion, challenging the idea that societal approval is necessary for happiness. Meanwhile, Dominic embarked on a path of restitution. He apologized to individuals he had wronged, not merely with words, but through actions demonstrating accountability. He supported initiatives for LGBT+ inclusion, racial justice, and family counseling. Through these acts, he discovered that leadership rooted in empathy and humility is far more impactful than authority rooted in fear and judgment. The cathedral, once a symbol of rigid orthodoxy, transformed into a sanctuary of dialogue and inclusivity. Marcus and Dominic, though from very different walks of life, found a fragile but genuine partnership in purpose. The young man's courage had ignited a movement, the priest's redemption had tempered hearts, and the community began to embrace complexity without fear. Marcus reflected on the journey, recognizing that courage often requires confronting not only the external world but the internal landscapes of fear, shame, and societal expectation. His victory was not in humiliation but in illumination, the power of truth to foster growth and healing. Dominic, too, acknowledged the liberation found in honesty, the unexpected relief of being known, flaws and all, and the unexpected bonds forged through vulnerability. Change did not come overnight. Prejudice persisted, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. Yet the seeds of understanding had been sown. Families began to discuss love without judgment, communities engaged in honest dialogue, and young people saw models of bravery and integrity in those who had come before them. Marcus and Dominic continued to navigate challenges, learning from each other, pushing boundaries, and redefining what it means to live authentically within the framework of faith and society. The narrative of exposure, courage, and redemption became a quiet legend within the city. Stories circulated not of scandal, but of growth, empathy, and the power of standing for truth. Marcus's name became synonymous with bravery and justice, Dominic's with redemption and humility. Their intertwined journeys illustrated that human dignity is not contingent upon conformity, but upon authenticity, compassion, and courage. Through it all, the cathedral stood as both witness and participant in transformation. Its walls had absorbed the echoes of fear, the whispers of prejudice, and now resounded with voices of hope, courage, and dialogue. Light filtered through the stained glass in new ways, illuminating faces previously obscured in shadow, symbolizing the emergence of understanding and the enduring power of love. Marcus walked through the city streets with a quiet confidence, aware that his actions had ripple effects beyond his immediate surroundings. Children looked up to him, peers sought his guidance, and adults respected the integrity with which he lived his life. His experiences underscored a simple yet profound truth. Change begins with the courage to confront injustice, to speak, and to act even when the odds seem insurmountable. Dominic, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, now symbolized the potential for growth. His journey was not one of absolution alone, but of continuous reflection and action. He learned to navigate the delicate balance between faith and authenticity, morality and empathy, authority and vulnerability. His sermons evolved, incorporating lessons from lived experience, narratives of courage, and reflections on love in its many forms. Evenings in the cathedral, once silent except for ritualized prayers, now resonated with conversation and reflection. Parishioners discussed books, shared stories, and questioned assumptions in ways that would have been unimaginable months prior. Marcus occasionally led discussions on justice and courage, while Dominic contributed with humility, listening more than instructing, guiding more than condemning. The ripple of change extended beyond the walls of the church into homes, workplaces, and schools. Conversations that had long been avoided emerged with surprising candor. Families discussed acceptance, communities debated inclusion, and young people felt emboldened to claim identities previously suppressed. Marcus's bravery became a model, illustrating that even one voice, when unwavering, can inspire societal reflection and transformation. As weeks turned into months, the city around the cathedral slowly absorbed the tremors of transformation Marcus had set in motion. Whispers of scandal were replaced by murmurs of respect, and the community began to recognize that courage could shape reality in ways no sermon ever could. Dominic, once rigid in his self-assured authority, now approached each day with humility, understanding that leadership was not about imposing morality but guiding through empathy and example. Marcus became a quiet force within the community, a bridge between those who had suffered prejudice and those too afraid to confront their biases. He continued to speak at schools, forums, and neighborhood gatherings, advocating for intersectional justice and encouraging others to embrace their authentic selves. Children who had once been shamed for who they were now saw models of courage and resilience walking among them, and their parents, initially resistant, began to reconsider the frameworks that had constrained their understanding of love and identity. Family gatherings, once fraught with tension, began to shift in tone. Marcus's mother, proud yet cautious, found relief in witnessing her son's integrity in action. Family dinners that once carried the weight of unspoken rules and veiled judgments now buzzed with laughter, conversation, and shared stories of growth. Marcus's siblings, who had been quietly supportive but hesitant, found their own voices, discussing issues of race, sexuality, and identity with newfound confidence. Dominic, too, navigated his own path of redemption. He sought out individuals he had wronged over the years, offering apologies not just in words but in acts of service and allyship. His sermons transformed, weaving narratives of inclusion, empathy, and courage. He spoke openly of his own journey, revealing the struggle between societal expectations and personal truth. Parishioners initially skeptical began to see the sincerity of his transformation, and the cathedral itself became a symbol of reconciliation, a place where human complexity could coexist with faith. Yet not all embraced change immediately. Some parishioners clung to traditional notions of morality, hesitant to reconcile the priest's past with his present. Others whispered doubts, fearing that tolerance might erode the foundations of their beliefs. Marcus, Dominic, and the supportive members of the congregation understood that transformation was a process, often slow and uneven, but every conversation, every act of courage, moved the community closer to understanding and acceptance. Marcus's role in this unfolding drama brought him into unexpected alliances. Local activists, educators, and community leaders sought his guidance, impressed by his ability to navigate conflict with both clarity and compassion. He encouraged dialogue that bridged generational, racial, and cultural divides, emphasizing the importance of empathy, listening, and accountability. His approach was not confrontational but invitational, demonstrating that lasting change arises not from condemnation but from engagement and shared humanity. Dominic found in Marcus not only a catalyst for his own transformation but also a partner in building a more inclusive and compassionate community. Their relationship evolved cautiously, founded on mutual respect and understanding rather than romance, though deep emotional bonds grew over time. Marcus inspired Dominic to confront biases he had long ignored, and Dominic offered insights into navigating institutional structures resistant to change. Together, they became a force for reflection and progress, challenging others to confront their own fears and assumptions. At the same time, personal challenges continued to arise. Marcus faced subtle forms of racism and homophobia in public spaces, while Dominic encountered skepticism and resistance from colleagues accustomed to unquestioned authority. Both had to navigate these pressures with resilience, balancing advocacy with self-care, and learning that courage often requires persistence in the face of discomfort. The community itself began to reflect the impact of Marcus's actions. Local schools implemented programs addressing diversity, inclusion, and empathy. Families initiated dialogues around acceptance, and neighbors engaged in open discussions about bias, privilege, and identity. The ripple effect of one young man's courage, combined with a redeemed leader's commitment to integrity, demonstrated the transformative power of truth spoken without fear. One Sunday, a year after the confrontation that had reshaped the cathedral, Dominic prepared to give a sermon unlike any he had delivered before. He spoke of love in its many forms, of the courage to live authentically, and of the moral responsibility to confront injustice wherever it resides. The congregation listened, moved by the sincerity in his voice, many reflecting silently on their own journeys toward understanding. Marcus, seated quietly among them, observed the change in faces around him, expressions of contemplation, empathy, and even tentative hope. After the service, families lingered in conversation. Children shared stories of being brave in their own lives. Parents offered apologies for past misunderstandings, and the air was filled with a sense of community reborn. Dominic approached Marcus afterward, not as a figure of authority, but as a fellow human being grateful for the lessons he had learned. "I never imagined I could learn so much from someone so young," he admitted. Marcus smiled, a mix of humility and pride. "You just had to be willing to see it," he replied. In the evenings, as the city's lights reflected against the cathedral's stained glass windows, Marcus often found himself walking the quiet streets, reflecting on how far he had come. The fear and isolation that once weighed so heavily now felt distant, replaced by the satisfaction of having spoken truth and sparked transformation. Yet he remained aware of the work still to be done. Prejudice and ignorance were resilient, but so too were courage, empathy, and resilience. Dominic, too, spent evenings in reflection. He revisited the letters and memories that had once been sources of shame, now repurposed as tools for growth and understanding. He engaged in dialogue with fellow clergy, some skeptical, some inspired, emphasizing the importance of aligning faith with authenticity, morality with integrity, and leadership with compassion. Slowly, the culture within the cathedral and surrounding community began to shift, one conversation at a time. Marcus's influence extended beyond the immediate community. He connected with youth groups, advocacy organizations, and networks focused on racial justice and LGBT+ rights. His story became an example of how personal courage can intersect with societal change, demonstrating that transformation often begins with the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and speak openly despite risk. Within families, the changes were equally profound. Marcus's mother, once fearful of social backlash, embraced her son's authenticity and became a quiet advocate within her own circles. Siblings who had been hesitant to discuss sexuality and race now engaged in dialogue, offering support and challenging long-held biases. The family unit, tested by societal pressures, emerged stronger, more connected, and more compassionate. Dominic's personal redemption also reshaped his own sense of purpose. He learned to approach pastoral care with empathy, guiding others not through fear or condemnation, but through understanding, support, and accountability. Parishioners began to approach him not only for spiritual guidance but for advice on navigating personal challenges, finding in him a model of growth and transformation that transcended doctrine. The cathedral, once a symbol of rigid authority, now symbolized inclusion and dialogue. Programs addressing diversity, mental health, and community engagement were introduced, and parishioners who had once feared speaking their truths now found platforms for expression. Marcus and Dominic, working together, encouraged reflection, dialogue, and advocacy, demonstrating that faith and authenticity need not be in conflict. One afternoon, Marcus received a letter from a young man in another city, detailing his own struggles with identity, family acceptance, and societal prejudice. The letter reflected courage and hope, inspired by Marcus's actions. Marcus felt a surge of responsibility and gratitude. The act of speaking truth had created a network of inspiration, a chain reaction reaching far beyond his immediate environment. Dominic, observing Marcus's growing impact, recognized that redemption and courage are inseparable when paired with action. He began mentoring young clergy, emphasizing the importance of authenticity, empathy, and accountability. The lessons he had learned, painful yet invaluable, became part of his legacy, shaping a new generation of spiritual leaders. Community events continued to integrate dialogue around inclusion, race, and sexuality. Art, literature, and storytelling became tools for exploring identity and fostering empathy. Children, adolescents, and adults engaged in conversations that were once taboo, discovering common ground and mutual respect. Marcus often facilitated these gatherings, teaching that courage is contagious, empathy is teachable, and integrity is transformative. Over time, even those initially resistant to change began to soften. Exposure to stories, dialogue, and sustained personal example helped individuals confront internalized biases. Families healed through conversation and reflection, and communities began to reimagine their values through the lens of understanding rather than judgment. The city, once indifferent or hostile to difference, gradually embraced the lessons sparked by Marcus's courage and Dominic's redemption. Public recognition of their efforts emerged not as sensational headlines, but through quiet acknowledgement in schools, community centers, and personal networks. Their story became a model of how personal integrity and bravery can ripple outward, affecting social change. One evening, as the sun set over the cathedral spires, Marcus and Dominic walked together through the gardens adjoining the church. The air was filled with the fragrance of blooming flowers, a symbol of renewal and resilience. Marcus turned to Dominic, eyes reflecting both gratitude and hope. "We've come far," he said softly. Dominic nodded, feeling a weight lift from decades of fear and denial. "Yes, but the journey continues," he replied, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in years. In that moment, both understood that courage, truth, and love are ongoing commitments. The scars of the past would never completely fade, but the choices made in honesty, empathy, and bravery had forged a new path. Families had been strengthened, communities had been awakened, and the city had glimpsed the transformative power of authenticity. Marcus returned home to his mother and siblings, sharing stories of progress, listening to theirs, and celebrating small victories of understanding and acceptance. His heart, once burdened by fear and prejudice, now carried hope grounded in the knowledge that even one voice, steadfast and truthful, can inspire profound change. Dominic continued his work within the cathedral and beyond, committed to fostering spaces where truth and empathy guided human interaction. He reflected often on Marcus's impact, acknowledging that courage is not a solitary act but a shared journey, and that redemption, like love, flourishes when nurtured through honesty and compassion. As night fell, the cathedral lights glowed softly, illuminating the faces of those who had gathered for evening reflection. Conversations echoed through the hall, gentle yet persistent, a testament to the enduring impact of courage and truth. Marcus and Dominic, though walking different paths, shared a vision of a community transformed by empathy, understanding, and the bravery to confront fear. The city, now subtly changed, whispered of hope. Prejudice remained, as it always would, but so did courage, love, and the enduring power of human integrity. Families learned to embrace differences, communities began to prioritize understanding, and young people grew up with examples of bravery, compassion, and authenticity. Marcus's journey had begun with fear, secrecy, and isolation, yet it culminated in a quiet triumph. The awakening of a community, the reconciliation of a flawed leader, and the reinforcement of family bonds. Dominic's redemption, born from exposure, reflection, and accountability, demonstrated that even the most rigid can change when confronted with truth and compassion. In the final moments of that transformative year, Marcus stood outside the cathedral, looking up at the spires reaching toward the sky. He felt the weight of history and expectation, but also the lightness of liberation. He knew the journey of courage and love would continue, touching lives far beyond the walls of the cathedral, inspiring those who might otherwise remain silent. Dominic approached, placing a hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder. "You've changed more than just my life," he said quietly. Marcus smiled, the air between them filled with understanding, respect, and unspoken gratitude. "And you've shown me that even those who have fallen can rise," he replied. Together, they stood in the fading light, witnesses to the power of truth, courage, and love, ready to continue shaping a world where authenticity and empathy are stronger than fear and prejudice. The story of the proud priest and the brave black man became more than a tale of confrontation. It became a testament to the enduring strength of human dignity, the necessity of courage, and the hope that even in the face of systemic prejudice, love and integrity can prevail. It was a narrative of transformation, a beacon for those navigating the complex intersections of identity, faith, and family, and a reminder that the path to justice is paved with honesty, resilience, and the courage to act. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.